Welcome back to 50 States of Mystery. Today, we journey to the heart of Mississippi to unravel one of the state's most captivating tales of scandal, romance, and unanswered questions. I'm Nigel Foxworthy, your host, and together we'll explore the life and trial of Dr. Ruth Dean, a woman of great ambition and mystery. From her enigmatic beginnings to a sensational courtroom drama, Ruth's story is filled with twists and turns that still leave us wondering. So, grab your magnifying glass, dear detectives, and let's dive in. In 1920, a young Ruth Dean penned these prophetic words in her university yearbook. "I believe the first thing in a biography is to state when and where you were born, and that's hardly fair, is it? Suffice it to say that I was born in Greenville, Mississippi. My likes and dislikes are very pronounced. I don't like cheese. I do like poetry. My favourite song is Bubbles." And then, Ruth added something deeper. "Really, I'm not becoming a physician in order to get rich. I simply realised that knowledge is power, and I want power. Power to understand the human heart. I have mastered the workings of the little instrument called stethoscope, and am in a position to understand fully the true condition of every masculine heart that may be offered me." Did Ruth Dean understand the workings of Dr. Kennedy's heart before he died? Let's uncover the complex tale of one of Mississippi's most intriguing mysteries. Dr. Ruth Dean wasn't your typical Southern woman. At 36, she was already breaking boundaries as one of Mississippi's first female physicians. Her early life, though, is as mysterious as her later years. In the 1910 census, she was recorded as the only dean in a household of Moors, with little information about her family origins. But Ruth persevered and became a highly regarded doctor, carving out her own path. Her life seemed like one of achievement until her romantic involvements and her ties to a tragic death would come to overshadow her career. Enter Dr. John Preston Kennedy, a respected though troubled surgeon recently divorced from his wife Bessie. Dr. Dean and Dr. Kennedy had maintained a long-distance relationship for years. But while working in Delaware, Ruth met a younger man, Franklin Moore, a dashing riverboat captain. The three became entangled in a complex love triangle that would soon lead to scandal and tragedy. In 1933, just as Dr. Dean planned to marry Captain Moore, Dr. Kennedy's jealousy reached a breaking point. "I won't let you do it. I will kill us both first," he reportedly warned. In a shocking twist, he died later that year after an evening spent with Ruth, who would later be accused of poisoning him with bichloride of mercury in his highball. By 1931, Bessie, Dr. Kennedy's wife, had grown suspicious of his ongoing relationship with Dr. Dean. Together with Kennedy's brother, she discovered 6 love letters from Dean, which eventually led to their divorce. Dr. Dean had returned to Mississippi by 1933, still corresponding with Moore. During this time, however, Dr. Kennedy was writing to Dr. Dean too. He even hinted at marriage, but there was no proof that he intended to reconcile with his ex-wife, Bessie. Bessie, in the meantime, took their child, a daughter, on a cruise, perhaps to distance herself from the situation. Kennedy had to pay support, as well as sign over an insurance policy that would pay double indemnity upon his death. According to sources, Kennedy was having a hard time paying the policy payments. Now, let us provide a little more information on Dr. Kennedy. In 1932, he became violently ill with symptoms that would be recreated in 1933 before his death. This was proven by witness testimony and letters he wrote to Dr. Dean about his illness and suffering. Dr. Kennedy evidently had various issues that cast a shadow on the trial to come and how exactly he died. So, who did Ruth truly love? The well-established Dr. Kennedy or the younger, charming Captain Moore? Dr. Dean later testified that she intended to marry Moore in August, but in the weeks before, Dr. Kennedy grew possessive. "I won't let you do it. I will kill us both first," he reportedly warned her. Despite his jealousy, Dr. Kennedy was also drinking heavily and appeared to be deeply depressed. He and Dr. Dean went for a drive, where he left her with one final promise: "I won't let you go." Ruth was 36, a career woman, and yet in the 1930s most women married and had children. We can ascertain that Ruth was a romantic, as in 1920 she loved poetry and intended to find the answer to the masculine heart. Just supposition on my part. But as a romantic myself, Ruth, a prolific letter writer, was caught between an older divorced man and a younger, viral, handsome riverboat captain. There is no doubt that she was flattered by the attention from both, but she also had a busy career in medicine, traveling and learning more about her profession. But still, she had a poetic heart as well. On the night of August 4th, 1933, just 4 days before Dr. Dean's intended marriage to Captain Maul, Dr. Kennedy received a late-night phone call. He left his home, returning shortly thereafter smelling of whiskey and visibly ill. He staggered in, muttering, and collapsed onto his bed, barely able to move. The next day, Kennedy's health rapidly deteriorated, but he dragged himself to perform an emergency appendectomy on a young patient. Then, he fell back into his bed, his condition worsening by the hour. Family members rushed him to the hospital as rumours spread that Dr. Dean had poisoned him with bichloride of mercury in his highball glass. At the hospital, his condition worsened and he was given the antidote, but nothing seemed to work. There were questions as to why he was so sick. Dr. Kennedy soon died. The doctors who attended him thought that bichloride of mercury could have killed him. There was even talk of suicide. Another physician speculated that he had Bright disease. Bright's disease is an archaic term for what is now referred to as nephritis. Nephritis is an inflammation of the kidneys caused by toxins, infection, or autoimmune conditions. It is not strictly a single disease, but rather a condition with a number of types and causes. But the two brothers of Dr. Kennedy swore that he gave a bedside statement that Dr. Dean had poisoned him with mercury in his highball glass. The question remained as to whether Dr. Kennedy was even capable of making any statement at the time. In a highly publicised case in 1920, mercury bichloride was reported to have caused the death of 25-year-old American silent film star Olive Thomas. While vacationing in France, she accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, ingested the compound, which had been prescribed to her husband, Jack Pickford, in liquid topical form to treat his syphilis. Thomas died 5 days later. Mercury dichloride is a highly toxic compound, both acutely and as a cumulative poison. Its toxicity is due not just to its mercury content, but also to its corrosive properties, which can cause serious internal damage. It seems improbable that anyone knew what particular poison Dr. Kennedy had been poisoned by unless he told them. And how did he know? Dr. Kennedy was dead and his family were pointing the finger at none other than Dr. Ruth Dean, his lover. Ruth Dean was arrested, and her trial became the talk of the town. The prosecution alleged she had poisoned him out of jealousy. Although Dr. Kennedy's brothers claimed he made a deathbed confession accusing her, the evidence was circumstantial. There were no witnesses to their last meeting, and Dr. Kennedy's brothers themselves had conflicting accounts about his illness and self-treatment before he went to the hospital. Suspicion alone wasn't enough for the courtroom packed with women who saw Dr. Dean as a villain. Captain Maul was supposed to appear as a witness at the trial, but it seems the trial was too much for the caption. He said his mother was ill, and he had to go to her bedside. All the loving letters seemed to mean nothing, and he would not marry Ruth after all. Later, when speaking to reporters, he said he did not believe Ruth murdered Dr. Kennedy, and yet he still deserted her at a time when she needed him most. During the trial, Ruth said she did not meet with Kennedy on the night he was alleged to have been poisoned. If it was not Ruth, who was desperately calling time after time, ringing the home Kennedy shared with a roommate, who did Kennedy finally speak with that night and rush out to meet? The brothers swore Kennedy told them he had met Ruth, and she had given him 2 highballs, and when he was to have had the third, he had to go get water to water it down. He did return early that morning, smelling of whiskey. He then remained sick for several days, but when he received a call for an emergency appendectomy, he gave himself a shot of morphine and performed the operation. Another doctor had to stitch the patient up. He then returned to his sick bed when he was finally taken to a hospital where he did. This is the story. But was it true? Ruth was to have been married. Kennedy knew and was drinking and depressed. What reason would Ruth have to murder Kennedy? If she still loved him, and yes, they were still exchanging letters during this time, why marry Captain Moore? Kennedy was divorced and had been hinting at marriage. One of the issues was money. According to the records, Kennedy had problems paying his ex-wife and the insurance bill. Was money a reason for Kennedy's depression, along with the fact Ruth was allegedly going to marry another man? Was Ruth stringing Moore along in order to push Kennedy into marriage? Did Kennedy, who told others what he was poisoned with, have nefarious motives in mind by taking the poison in order to frame Ruth through jealousy and bitterness? We will never know for sure. Kennedy's motives died with him if he had any.
The nation's eyes are on the Floor County Courthouse down in Greenwood, Mississippi, where 33-year-old Dr. Sarah Ruth Dean is on trial for her life. Dr. Dean, walking to court between her attorneys, is charged with murder. There she goes behind that tree. She posed later, however, with one of her defense counsel who seeks to save her from the gallows. The man who died was Dr. J. Preston Kennedy, prominent physician who prosecution says died from a poison highball. The court opens with Judge S.F. Davis on the bench. There's Dr. Dean being seated. Judge Davis calls the court to order and lights up according to the Mississippi custom. The townspeople brought box lunches following every moment of the sensational testimony. It's one of the few localities in the United States where folks believe in solid comfort, even in courtrooms. How about it, Dad? The day's proceedings ended, the spectators, mostly women, head homeward, while another woman, Dr. Sarah Ruth Dean, honor student of 2 universities, fights for her life.
Dr. Dean was convicted, not so much for the supposed crime, but rather for the image she portrayed, a woman with ambition, intelligence, and unrestrained passion. The community blamed her for stealing Dr. Kennedy away from his wife Bessie, and the jury convicted her on purely circumstantial evidence. Yet, her defense argued that Dr. Kennedy's deteriorating mental state and frequent heavy drinking were to blame. Dr. Ruth Dean was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Ruth became very ill at the prison and was transferred so that she could be cared for. Her case was appealed and denied. She was given a 30-day period during her illness so that whatever her condition, she could be cared for. This was in 1935. And in 1935, something miraculous occurred. In 1935, Governor Senet Connor signed a complete and unconditional pardon for Dr. Dean, citing undisclosed information not presented in court. Connor himself remained tight-lipped, stating only that he knew things the public and the court did not. Ruth was a free woman once more, but what new information had the governor uncovered? Had Dr. Kennedy truly been poisoned, or did he succumb to his own vices, driven mad by his jealousy over Ruth's engagement to another man? After her pardon, Ruth quietly resumed her career. By 1940, she was practicing medicine in Greenwood, living with relatives. In 1950, she married Marshall Pitchford and worked for over 17 years as a physician at the Mississippi State Mental Hospital. Perhaps her service career was an attempt to make amends, or perhaps it simply reflected her dedication to medicine. Her husband passes in 1958, and Ruth herself died in 1970. This is a photo of Ruth and her husband before his death. This is also her obituary. Ruth served others for the rest of her life. and we hope she obtained a sense of happiness after the horror of the trial. Was Ruth truly guilty? Did her words in that yearbook foreshadow a heart she would one day claim, perhaps at a terrible cost? And what information could have caused the governor to intervene so dramatically? In the end, Ruth's story remains as mysterious as it began, her life marked by both brilliance and shadow. Keep looking for those mysteries and join me, Nigel Foxworthy, once again as we travel across the United States, uncovering the secrets that lie hidden in every corner. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true mystery. Until next time, stay curious